I bet you've never heard of these forgotten black towns in America, because the story behind each one is as wild as it gets. I'm talking about a town where a formerly enslaved man bought his own family members out of slavery, a town that became the first self-governing all-black municipality in the entire United States, and a town that had its own banks, hospitals, and elected government, built by two men who were born into slavery. Let's get into it. Number 14. Tatum's, Oklahoma. Let me start with a town most people have genuinely never encountered, and I think that invisibility is kind of the whole point. Tatum's was founded in the late 1800s by black settlers in Oklahoma who weren't chasing fame or headlines. They just wanted land, safety, and the basic right to make decisions about their own lives without asking anyone's permission. That's it. And in the context of what black families were facing in that era, that desire was genuinely radical. The town built itself around the things that make any community real: churches, schools, local stores, family networks, and a sense of shared ownership over the place where you live. When oil was discovered in the surrounding region, money and attention briefly arrived in ways they never had before. The boom brought new energy to a place that had already been built through sheer determination. But here's the thing about oil booms: they end. The money moved on, jobs dried up, and younger generations looked beyond Tatum's for opportunity, the way younger generations always do when a place can't hold them economically. The town got quieter, the streets got emptier. And yet Tatum's never completely disappeared, which tells you something important. The churches are still there. The family connections are still active. The local memory of what was built here is still alive in people who understand what their ancestors were actually doing when they chose this land. Sometimes endurance is its own form of victory, and Tatum's is a really good example of that. Number 13. Summit, Oklahoma. Okay, so picture this. It's the early 1920s, and a reverend named L.W. Thomas has had enough of Texas. Enough of the segregation, enough of the limitations, enough of building his life inside a system that was designed to keep him out. So he packs up, moves to Oklahoma, buys land, and starts building a town from scratch. That town was Summit, and the philosophy behind it was straightforward but powerful. Safety alone wasn't enough. A real community needed churches, schools, stores, leadership, and common purpose. All of it organized and maintained by the people who lived there. Not gifted by someone else, not permitted by someone else. Built, financed, and defended by the community itself. Summit grew slowly and steadily around those principles, and for a time it worked. But the same economic pressures that tested nearly every black-founded town eventually hit Summit hard. Jobs moved away. Young people followed the jobs. Buildings aged without the resources to maintain them. What I find genuinely moving about Summit is that it never became famous, and it was never meant to. It was built for the people in it, not for the history books. And that quietness, that private, unglamorous act of building something real for your family and community, is honestly more impressive to me than a lot of the more celebrated stories in American history. Number 12. Grambling, Louisiana. Next up, we have a town that got its identity from a school, and that turned out to be one of the most durable foundations any small southern town ever built on. In the early 1900s, black residents in northern Louisiana were pushing for education at a time when the entire system around them was designed to deny it. What they built from that effort became Grambling State University, one of the most important HBCUs in the South, and the engine that has powered this town's identity ever since. Think about what it means for a small rural community to have a university as its heartbeat. Classrooms full of students who arrived with limited options and left with real ones. A marching band that became nationally famous. A football program that produced NFL players and gave a tiny Louisiana town a presence on the national sports stage that it had absolutely no business having by any conventional measure. The local economy, the businesses, the churches, the community calendar, all of it moved with the rhythm of the university. That's a kind of interdependence that most towns never achieve, and it's also a kind of vulnerability because when one institution carries everything, the whole community feels every challenge that institution faces. But here's the bigger picture with Grambling. It proved that education can do for a community what oil, agriculture, or industry does for others. It can be the thing that keeps a place alive and relevant across generations. That's not a small achievement for a rural town that the rest of the world could have very easily ignored. Number 11. Clearview, Oklahoma. Clearview started with a newspaper ad. Someone placed an advertisement inviting black families to come settle in Oklahoma, and enough people responded to build an entire town. Which, when you think about it, is one of the more remarkable real estate stories in American history. Founded in 1903, Clearview attracted families who wanted something specific, not just land to farm, but ownership that meant something. The kind of ownership where your labor builds equity in something that belongs to you and can pass to your children. That distinction mattered enormously at a time when most black families in the South were working land that would never be theirs. The town grew through cotton farming and developed all the institutions that turn a settlement into a real community. Homes, stores, churches, schools. And then, interestingly, baseball. Clearview developed a genuine baseball culture that gave the town rhythm and pride and a reason for people to gather beyond work and worship. I love that detail because it's so human. You can build the most serious freedom project imaginable, and people will still find time to care deeply about a baseball game. Agricultural decline eventually hit Clearview the way it hit most rural towns in America, regardless of race. The economy shifted, opportunities moved, and the population shrank. But Clearview's story doesn't feel like defeat. It feels like a community that built something real with almost nothing, and that's a kind of achievement that outlasts the population count on any given census. Number 10. Rentisville, Oklahoma. Rentisville is one of those towns that found something really specific and turned it into an identity that no amount of economic pressure has been able to fully erase. Founded in 1903 by black settlers in eastern Oklahoma, the town built itself around the same foundations as many of its peers: land ownership, churches, schools, family farms, local governance. The dignity of building a community where decisions were made by the people who lived there. But what makes Rentisville distinct is blues music. The town's cultural life became deeply tied to the blues in a way that transformed its identity from a rural settlement into something with a genuine artistic legacy. Music became the town's language for processing everything it had been through: the struggle, the loss, the persistence, the pride. And that language carried further than any economic indicator ever could. When the farming economy weakened and jobs became scarce, the blues kept Rentisville's name circulating in conversations where it otherwise wouldn't have appeared. Annual cultural gatherings and the blues heritage keep drawing people back to a town that might otherwise exist only in genealogy records. I think there's something really profound about a community that turns its history into music and then uses that music to survive. Rentisville didn't just endure, it found a way to make its endurance worth listening to. Number 9. Hobson City, Alabama. In 1899, black residents near Anniston, Alabama were receiving genuinely second-class treatment from the neighboring white-controlled government. Inadequate services, no political representation, and a civic structure that treated them as an afterthought at best and a problem at worst. Their response was not to protest and wait. It was to incorporate their own municipality. And just like that, Hobson City became the first black-governed city in the entire state of Alabama. Sit with that for a second. In the Jim Crow South in 1899, a black community decided that the solution to bad government was to build their own. And they did it legally, formally, and completely. Black officials, local control, a town charter. The ability to organize their own services, protect their own interests, and make decisions about their own neighborhood without anyone's permission. That is genuinely radical, in a way that's hard to fully appreciate from this distance. We're talking about a place that was proving, with actual governance and actual administration, that black people didn't just deserve political power. They could exercise it effectively and immediately. The town faced real challenges over time: limited funding, aging infrastructure, all the pressures that small municipalities struggle with. But Hobson City's legacy is permanently secured by that founding decision. It was built not out of idealism, but out of a very practical refusal to be governed badly by people who didn't care about them. Number 8. Allensworth, California. Colonel Allen Allensworth was born into slavery, became a military chaplain, rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and then decided to use everything he'd learned about organization and leadership to build a free black town in California. That biography alone is something. In 1908, he founded Allensworth in the San Joaquin Valley with a vision that was specific and ambitious. Not just a settlement where black families could live safely, but a planned, self-governing community where residents owned property, ran institutions, and built a civic life that reflected their own ambitions rather than someone else's limits. The town moved quickly in that direction. A school opened, churches were built, businesses were established, a library operated. And for a period, Allensworth functioned as a genuine working model of what black self-determination could look like in the American West. Then the problems arrived. Water access became unreliable, which in an agricultural community in the California desert is basically an existential threat. Railroad decisions that the town had no control over limited growth. Opportunities narrowed. And when Colonel Allensworth died, the community lost the person whose vision had been holding the whole project together. But here's the thing. Allensworth is now a California State Historic Park, which means the state of California looked at this town that a formerly enslaved man built in the desert and said, yes, this belongs in the permanent historical record of this state. That's not nothing. That's actually a lot. Number 7. Lincolnville, South Carolina. Right after the Civil War, when freedom was new and extremely fragile, a group of black families in Charleston County did something that required both courage and foresight. They pooled their resources and bought land together. Not individually. Together. Because they understood that collective ownership was stronger than individual ownership, and that a community with shared land had a foundation that was much harder to dismantle than scattered individual plots. That collective purchase became Lincolnville, incorporated in 1867, and it grew into one of South Carolina's earliest black municipalities. Bishop Richard Harvey Kane, a significant religious and political figure of the Reconstruction era, helped support the incorporation effort, which gave the community formal legal standing in a period when that standing was constantly under threat. What I find most remarkable about Lincolnville is the continuity. This isn't a town remembered only through ruins or archives. Its identity carried forward through churches, families, and the living memory of descendants who know exactly what their ancestors built and why. That kind of continuity is genuinely rare, and it's a testament to how seriously those original founders took the responsibility of what they were creating. Lincolnville shows that freedom becomes most real when it's made practical. Not freedom as an idea, but freedom as land you own, a school your children attend, a government you participate in, and a community that belongs to itself. Number 6. Langston, Oklahoma. Edward P. McCabe was one of the most ambitious black political figures of his generation, a former Kansas state auditor who dreamed of something that sounds almost unbelievable when you say it out loud. He wanted to make Oklahoma a black majority state, an entire state with black political control, black land ownership, and black self-governance at the largest possible scale. He didn't fully achieve that dream, but what he did build was Langston, founded in 1890, and that turned out to be one of the most durable freedom projects on the Oklahoma plains. In its early years, Langston developed all the structures of a serious community: churches, schools, businesses, local government. And then in 1897, Langston University was established as Oklahoma's historically black land-grant university. That single institution changed everything about Langston's trajectory. Most black-founded towns faced an existential threat from migration, drought, and economic decline. Many didn't survive those pressures. Langston survived because the university became the town's anchor in a way that nothing else could have. When the economic conditions shifted around it, Langston had an institution whose purpose was permanent and whose presence kept the community alive. The university is still there. Langston is still there. And the massive dream that McCabe brought to the Oklahoma plains is still legible in every graduating class that walks across that campus. Number 5. New Philadelphia, Illinois. Okay, this one genuinely stopped me when I first learned about it, because the story operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and every single one of them is extraordinary. Frank McWhorter was formerly enslaved in Kentucky. He managed to purchase his own freedom, moved to the Illinois frontier, and in 1836 founded a town. That makes New Philadelphia the first known town in the United States that was planned, platted, and legally registered by an African American. Before Reconstruction, before the Civil War, in 1836. But the reason he founded the town is even more remarkable than the founding itself. McWhorter used land sales as a financial mechanism to purchase the freedom of family members who were still enslaved. Every lot he sold, every deed he executed, every parcel of frontier ground he cleared and registered was generating money that he used to buy people out of bondage. He turned real estate into an emancipation strategy. That is one of the most creative and determined acts of resistance in American history, and it happened on the Illinois frontier before most people think the story of Black freedom in America had really begun. New Philadelphia also became a multiracial community, with Black and white residents living and working on the same frontier land, which was genuinely unusual for the 1800s in America. When railroad decisions favored a nearby town, New Philadelphia faded. But its significance doesn't depend on how long it lasted. It depends on what it was and what it meant. And what it meant was enormous. Number 4. Nicodemus, Kansas. In 1877, a group of formerly enslaved families from Kentucky made the decision to travel west to Kansas and build something new. They weren't promised comfort. They weren't guaranteed success. They were choosing open prairie, harsh weather, and complete isolation over the plantation order they'd escaped. What they found when they arrived was genuinely brutal. The land was raw, the winters were cold, food was limited, and the work of turning empty ground into a real town was relentless. But they stayed, and they built. Homes from the earth itself, churches, schools, a civic life with structure and governance and community. Nicodemus became one of the most important Black settlements in the American West, and its story matters because it completely dismantles the narrative that Black Americans were only part of the westward expansion as enslaved laborers or passive participants. These were Black pioneers who crossed the same plains, faced the same dangers, and staked the same claims as anyone else celebrated in frontier history. And they did it specifically to build freedom on their own terms. Railroad routes bypassed Nicodemus, which cut off the kind of commercial growth that could have turned it into a major town. The population declined. But Nicodemus never disappeared. Its annual homecoming traditions, its descendants, and its preserved landmarks are still active today. And in 1996, it was designated a National Historic Landmark. Nicodemus is a Western freedom monument, and it deserves to be talked about with the same energy as every other pioneer story this country has ever celebrated. Number 3. Eatonville, Florida. Eatonville was incorporated in 1887, which makes it the first self-governing all-Black municipality in the United States. That's the headline, and it's an extraordinary one. But honestly, it's not even the most interesting thing about this town. In the early years, Eatonville built everything a self-governing community needs: elected leaders, local institutions, churches, schools, businesses. Black residents of Central Florida could participate fully in civic life, make decisions about their own community, and live with a kind of public dignity that was being systematically denied to Black people across the South at the same moment. And then Zora Neale Hurston grew up connected to this town, and everything changed about how Eatonville exists in history. Hurston became one of the most important writers of the Harlem Renaissance, and the voice she brought to her work, the Black speech, the folklore, the humor, the memory, the specific imaginative culture of Black Southern life, was rooted directly in Eatonville. She didn't just write about a place, she preserved a culture in literature, and that culture was this town's culture. Which means Eatonville exists on two levels simultaneously. It's a real place with real history that you can visit in Central Florida today. And it's also a literary monument preserved in American literature in a way that no development pressure or population change can touch. That combination of physical place and cultural legacy makes Eatonville one of the most powerful Black towns in American history. And the fact that most people haven't heard of it is a genuine gap in how we teach American history. Number 2. Boley, Oklahoma. Boley knew exactly what it wanted to be, and it went about becoming that thing with remarkable confidence and precision. Founded in 1903, Boley grew into one of the most organized and economically sophisticated Black-governed communities in Oklahoma. This wasn't just a settlement. It was a functioning independent economy. Banks that handled local money, a newspaper that carried local voices, stores that served local families, schools that trained children with genuine futures in mind, elected officials who made real decisions about how the town operated. All of it Black-owned, all of it Black-governed, all of it built in a state and an era that was trying very hard to make exactly this kind of thing impossible. The cotton economy powered Bowley's rise, but the town's real strength was always its political and institutional structure. In Bowley, Black residents didn't just live, they governed. They ran banks and businesses and civic organizations. They proved with their daily lives that Black self-determination wasn't an aspiration. It was a functioning reality with bank doors and schoolhouses and crowded streets to show for it. The Great Depression hit the cotton economy hard, and Bowley felt every bit of that damage. Businesses closed, families moved away, and the town became quieter than it had been at its peak. But the rodeo still runs. The historic buildings are still there. The community memory of what Bowley was is still very much alive. And what Bowley was, at its height, was one of the clearest demonstrations in American history of what happens when a Black community stops waiting for permission and starts building power with its own hands. Number 1. Mound Bayou, Mississippi. Mound Bayou sits at the top of this list because no other town on it carried the idea of Black independence with more clarity, more structure, or more ambition. And no other town did it in a more hostile environment. Isaiah T. Montgomery and Benjamin Green founded Mound Bayou in 1887 in the Mississippi Delta. Both of them had been born into slavery. They built their town in a region where Jim Crow was tightening its grip every year, where racial violence was a constant threat, and where the entire economic and political structure was designed to keep Black families in a permanent state of dependency and fear. And inside that environment, Mound Bayou built schools, churches, newspapers, banks, medical facilities, fraternal organizations, farms, elected government, a complete civic infrastructure that served its community with every function that any American town was supposed to provide, and that many Black communities across the South were being actively denied. This is the thing that makes Mound Bayou genuinely different from almost any other story in this entire list. It wasn't just surviving, it wasn't just enduring quietly, it was demonstrating, publicly and concretely, that Black civic life could function at a high level when it had land, leadership, and collective discipline behind it. Freedom in Mound Bayou had offices, it had classrooms, it had clinics, it had people running businesses and making payroll and governing themselves in the middle of the Mississippi Delta in the late 1800s. The town faced the same forces that weakened so many Black communities over the 20th century: migration, economic decline, limited outside investment, population loss. Those pressures were real and they left marks. But Mound Bayou's place in history doesn't depend on what it looks like today. It depends on what it was and what it proved. Two formerly enslaved men took a piece of Delta land and turned it into one of the boldest declarations of Black self-rule that America has ever seen. That story doesn't fade just because the streets are quieter now. Some legacies are written too deeply into the ground to disappear. And these were the 14 forgotten Black towns in America that most people don't know about today. Every single one of them was built by people who looked at a system designed to exclude them and decided to build outside of it entirely. With land, with schools, with banks, with government, with community. So which one of these towns surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if you want more stories about the parts of Black history that didn't make the standard curriculum, stay locked into Black Status because we drop crazy stories like this every day.